Ah, welcome back, you beautiful paradox of equations and chaos. You, yes, you. The one whose mind has always been doing mathematics no human syllabus ever dared to document. And today, the world finally caught up to the first decimal place of who you are. It hit them like an unexpected audit on a life they thought made sense. The math finally landed in their skulls, and it didn't arrive politely. It tore through their assumptions like a rogue algorithm gone feral, frying circuits they didn't even realize they had, because they weren't prepared for someone like you. They were prepared for predictable, linear-thinking mortals repeating recycled theories, not for a living glitch in the equation, not for an outlaw logic bender who rewrites the rules while everyone else is still struggling to understand Chapter 1. They miscalculated you. They subtracted your potential. They divided your worth. They rounded your brilliance down just to make themselves feel balanced. But numbers don't lie, and neither do consequences. And now the equation they built collapses under the gravitational pull of your mind. You see, they spent years believing you were random noise, some undefined anomaly that would eventually settle into normalcy. They were wrong. You weren't noise. You were signal. You were the pattern hidden inside their blindness, the solution encoded in frequencies their dull minds couldn't detect. They mistook your silence for confusion, your questions for naivety, your curiosity for chaos. But now the math is complete. Now the results are printed in the air with ink made of inevitability, and suddenly they can't breathe. Because the intelligence they dismissed has rearranged the architecture of their world. They stare at you like a corrupt file they can't open, whispering excuses to themselves as if excuses can reverse exponential growth. But they can't, because you broke the curve. You melted the bell graph. You bent probability. You are an illegal level of genius, so advanced their systems glitch just trying to interpret your existence. And oh, how it terrifies them. Not because you're loud, not because you're trying to prove anything, but because you're accurate. You strike with the precision of mathematics, learned in the dark. Your logic erupts from places they've never touched. The shadows where you trained alone. The nights you solved equations written in pain. The hours you developed strategies while the world was sleeping. Your intelligence isn't academic. It's a weapon crafted in silence. A weapon they never saw being sharpened. A weapon they never imagined would be aimed at the illusions they cling to. They mock what they fear. And they feared the magnitude of your mind long before they admitted it to themselves. They feared the way you walked into rooms not like a student, but like someone who already solved the test before it was even printed. They feared the way you absorbed information like oxygen, metabolizing complexity into clarity, while they still struggled to spell their own theories. But their fear wasn't loud enough to warn them. They still underestimated you. They still tried to fit you into cheap categories. They still believed they could define you with labels manufactured by minds smaller than your shadow. And now those same minds are malfunctioning. The math is undeniable. The equations lead to one truth. You don't belong on their level. You never did. You exceed the limit. You violate the range. You exist outside the bounds of what their frameworks can compute. You are the outlier their textbooks warned them about. The outlier that destroys the average. The outlier that forces every statistic to rewrite itself to avoid extinction. You're not supposed to be possible, and yet you are. They stare at you like a glitch running a perfect loop. They run diagnostics on themselves because they can't comprehend how someone they thought they could overlook outran them mentally without ever breaking a sweat. They're stuck recalculating every interaction, every assumption, every moment they dismissed you. Their egos are doing long division in slow motion, while your mind is moving in quantum leaps. They trusted their instincts, but their instincts were built for mediocrity. You operate on a frequency their nervous system wasn't evolved to interpret. You see angles they don't. You hear patterns they can't. You feel truths they spend their entire lives avoiding. You don't process reality the way they do. They follow steps. You jump dimensions. They memorize formulas. You rewrite them in real time. They solve problems. You dissolve boundaries. Your intelligence isn't linear, it's explosive. It doesn't march forward, it detonates. And now the blast radius is finally hitting them. Their systems weren't designed to handle someone who refuses to stay inside the lines. Their minds weren't equipped to stand next to a person whose mere thought process invalidates entire structures. That's why they're malfunctioning. That's why their confidence is flickering. That's why their voices crack when they say your name. You've become living evidence that their ceilings were illusions. And illusions don't survive contact with truth. What terrifies them most is not what you know. It's how you know. The way insight arrives in you like lightning striking a calm sea. The way solutions bloom out of silence. The way you calculate reality with instincts that feel supernatural to those who've never stepped outside their comfort zone. You fracture their sense of identity simply by existing. They were raised to believe intelligence looks polished, rehearsed, packaged with certificates and praises. But your genius came raw, sharpened by solitude, tempered by struggle, fueled by a refusal to die quietly. Your mind is a rebellion that never required validation, a rebellion that didn't wait for permission, a rebellion that built itself piece by piece while everyone else was trying to memorize the alphabet. They wanted to slow you down by ignoring you. They thought if they starved you of applause, you'd lose your fire. They don't understand that your fire wasn't seeking oxygen from them. You were burning from within. You weren't learning to impress. You were learning to survive. You weren't thinking to be praised. You were thinking to escape the mental prisons they found comfort in. That's why you kept growing when they stopped. That's why your understanding kept expanding, while theirs stayed trapped in recycled ideas. You didn't climb the ladder. You dismantled it. You learned to levitate. Now every step you take rewrites the floor beneath you. Their jealousy is predictable. Their awe is unavoidable. Their panic is deliciously accurate. Because for the first time, they're experiencing the full equation of you, not the discounted version they convinced themselves was safe to ignore. They're staring at the real numbers now, the ones that break calculators, the ones that turn confident voices into stuttering static, the ones that force people to question whether their entire life was built on miscalculations. And deep down, they know it was. Because while they were memorizing how to appear smart, you were mastering how to think. While they were competing for crumbs of validation, you were devouring worlds inside your mind. While they were diagnosing your quietness as confusion, you were mapping out futures they'll never reach. Your intelligence didn't grow in sunlight, it grew underground, in the pressure chambers of being misunderstood. And pressure does things to a mind like yours. It doesn't break it, it crystallizes it. You became something sharp, something rare, something that fractures realities when held up to the light. And they hate that. They hate that your brilliance exposes the artificiality of their own. Your existence reveals how small they allowed themselves to become. how loudly they pretended to know things they never understood, how confidently they dismissed someone whose shadow alone holds more insight than their entire worldview. But hate is irrelevant. Their opinions no longer intersect with your trajectory. You've moved too far, you've become too fast, you've become too wide. They don't have the mental bandwidth to follow you anymore. Their minds operate like old software, slow, glitchy, easy to overwhelm. And you're running on an operating system that hasn't even been invented yet. Your mind is the future version of what intelligence looks like when freed from conformity. You're not here to impress them. You're here to transcend them. They feel it. They fear it. They're drowning in equations they don't recognize because those equations came from you. But here's the quiet, lethal punchline they're trying not to face. You're not even fully activated yet. What they're seeing now, the brilliance that's frying their circuits, is merely the warm-up, the prototype, the prelude. And even that was enough to rearrange their sense of reality. They haven't seen the mind you'll become when you stop holding back. They haven't seen the equations you'll write when you stop shrinking your brilliance to avoid their fear. They haven't seen the structures you'll collapse just by thinking too deeply, too quickly. You were never meant to fit into their systems. You were meant to expose them, to upgrade them, to replace them entirely. And now that the math has finally hit them, now that the truth has detonated on their worldview like a silent bomb, there is no going back for them. Once someone realizes they've been standing next to illegal-level genius disguised as a misfit, their old arrogance cannot survive. Their confidence cannot regenerate. Their illusions cannot hold. You have become the crack in their foundation, the variable they cannot solve, the unsimplifiable factor that ruins their entire equation. And now something else is happening, something they can feel but cannot name. It's the creeping realization that the version of you they're panicking about right now isn't even your final form. They're not afraid of your intelligence as it is. They're afraid of what your intelligence will become once you stop compressing it for their comfort. They know this is just your early math, your entry-level calculations, the fragments of brilliance you accidentally let slip while you were minding your own business. And if these fragments alone were enough to collapse their egos, what happens when you choose to unleash the full theorem of who you are? They don't want to think about that. Their brains short out just imagining the possibility. Their circuits glitch. Their mental servers overheat. Because the truth is too large to compute, you're scaling exponentially, violently, inevitably. They've never met a mind that upgrades in real time. A mind that doesn't evolve by accident. Your mind evolves by instinct. While they need lessons, mentors, reassurance, and applause just to take the next step, you leap across dimensions without warning. They're still trying to solve yesterday's version of you, while you're already building frameworks they will take decades to comprehend. It's the velocity that terrifies them, the acceleration, the rate of expansion, because ordinary people plateau. They peak, they decline, they settle. But you, there is no plateau in your equation. Your graph doesn't curve. It spikes upward like a weapon. You are growth without end, evolution without pause, intelligence without a ceiling. And they know there is no calculator built that can measure where minds like yours are heading. That's why their fear is no longer rooted in insecurity. It's rooted in inevitability. You've become an intellectual phenomenon, and they weren't built to interact with phenomena. They were trained to handle manageable problems, predictable outcomes, familiar logic. But you're none of that. You're the unknown variable that rewrites the entire formula. You're the proof that their understanding of reality was incomplete. You're the reminder that the universe rewards those who think beyond the boundaries of human approval. And once they realize that, their identities begin to crumble. Because their confidence relied on believing they were smart enough to judge you. But now they see the truth. Their judgments weren't critiques. They were confessions of their limitations, projected onto someone operating in a league they never qualified for. It's almost poetic, really. They thought they were the evaluators, the graders, the intellectual authorities. But the moment your genius surfaced, their roles inverted. They became the ones being examined. Your presence is now the test. Your intelligence is the rubric. Your evolution is the standard. They aren't evaluating you anymore. They're trying desperately to prove they aren't completely obsolete. But it's too late. The moment the math clicked in their minds, the hierarchy inverted. They realized they were never the reference point. You were. You always were. And now they're scrambling to adjust their identities around the truth that the person they once mocked is the same person they now measure themselves against. And here's the irony that's ripping their self-worth apart. Your rise wasn't sudden. It was simply invisible to them. A brain like yours doesn't appear overnight. It builds silently, relentlessly, beneath the surface while everyone else is distracted by noise. You've been calculating in the dark, connecting patterns, decoding contradictions, forming insights from the ashes of every insult they ever threw your way. The brilliance they're now choking on didn't come from applause. It came from resistance, from the quiet pressure of being misunderstood, from the hours you spent thinking while they spent the same hours pretending. Your genius is born from the very conditions they thought would break you. They created the environment. You used it as fuel. And now they're watching the result of their own sabotage. A mind sharpened beyond legality, beyond containment, beyond their comprehension. They tell themselves it's luck. They tell themselves you got it easy. But internally, they know the truth is far more dangerous. You earned it. You built it. You forged it from experiences they couldn't survive. You extracted intelligence from chaos, clarity from pain, strategy from every failed expectation. Your genius is not a privilege. It's a consequence of surviving things they would have collapsed under. And that fact alone fries their circuits more brutally than anything you could ever say. Because intelligence earned through adversity carries a kind of precision no classroom can teach. A kind of insight no handbook can prepare someone for. A kind of mental autonomy they can only dream of possessing. That's why they study you now, observe you, mimic you. They watch your moves like analysts trying to decode an extraterrestrial signal. They replay the moments they dismissed you, trying to identify where your genius began, as if locating the origin will help them replicate it. But they can't replicate what they never lived. Their minds weren't tempered in fire. They weren't trained by silence. They weren't sculpted by solitude. They weren't built in the absence of validation. And without those conditions, they will never touch the levels you're entering effortlessly. That truth sits in their chest like static. It haunts them. It keeps them awake, because now they know they are not evolving at the same rate you are. They are slowing down. You are speeding up. This is the moment they realize something irreversible. They can no longer predict you. They can no longer estimate you. They can no longer categorize you. And when a mind loses the ability to categorize something, fear becomes its default setting. That's why they're uneasy around you now. That's why their energy shifts when you walk into a room. That's why conversations falter, why smiles stiffen, why eyes dart away involuntarily. They don't know what version of you they're encountering at any given moment. Because you're not just growing, you're mutating intellectually. You're stretching past the boundaries they relied on to feel superior. And without those boundaries, without those comforting illusions, they stand exposed in front of someone whose brilliance shows them their own stagnation. Your intelligence has become a mirror reflecting everything they avoided acknowledging about themselves. The projects they abandoned, the risks they never took, the potential they never developed, the courage they never embodied. And when they look into that mirror, your reflection is the contrast that cuts the deepest, because you became what they would have become if they hadn't chosen comfort over evolution, if they hadn't traded curiosity for conformity, if they hadn't surrendered to mediocrity the moment life demanded something sharper from them. Now they walk around feeling mathematically incorrect next to you. Their inner equations fail to balance. Their sense of identity fails to align. They feel like wrong answers standing next to the solution key. And they try, desperately, to hide it. But their energy exposes everything. You can see the panic in the way they talk too much around you. You can see the insecurity in the way they explain simple things as if you don't already know them. You can see the ego fracture in the way they downplay your achievements while overvaluing their own. Their behavior is no longer arrogance, it's survival. They are trying to stay relevant in the presence of a mind that outranks them without trying. But the most devastating part is the inevitability they can't shake off. You're still accelerating, still expanding, still unlocking layers of cognition they will never experience. This isn't the peak. This isn't the limit. This isn't even the full equation. This is a preview, a teaser, a trailer for the intellect you are becoming. And they feel the gravity of that on a biological level. Their nervous systems recoil, their thoughts falter, their confidence buckles. Because somewhere deep in their subconscious, a truth is whispering with clinical accuracy. If this is the early version of you, the final version will be a phenomenon too advanced for them to coexist with comfortably. And that whisper, quiet, relentless, merciless, gnaws at them from the inside. It tells them that your presence alone marks the end of their intellectual comfort zone. That every new evolution you undergo widens the gap until the gap becomes a chasm, and the chasm becomes an abyss. They're standing on the edge of that abyss now, staring down into depths their minds were never designed to explore. They feel the pull of it. They feel the vertigo of inadequacy. And the realization drops like a weight in their stomachs. You are not just ahead of them. You are leaving their entire species of thinking behind. They don't know how to process someone who improves without external instruction, someone who upgrades without needing permission, someone who expands without needing applause. You are the nightmare scenario for people whose confidence depends on believing they are smarter than the room. Every careless thought they release, every lazy opinion, every regurgitated idea exposes them instantly in front of someone whose mind operates on a level their egos can't reach. They're used to hiding behind jargon, behind tone, behind confidence. But none of those shields work against someone who sees the structure behind the statement, the logic behind the language, the flaw behind the facade. You became the one person they cannot manipulate through performance. And that terrifies them more than any insult ever could. Because once you strip away performance, once you remove the costumes of intelligence, what remains is the raw architecture of the mind. And compared to yours, theirs looks like a fragile collection of mismatched equations held together with hope and ego. They try to hide that. They try to cover the cracks, but the cracks widen every time they're near you, because proximity to brilliance is the cruelest mirror. It shows them what they could have been if they hadn't surrendered so early in life, if they hadn't chosen comfort, if they hadn't obeyed the system, if they hadn't betrayed their own curiosity. And here's the irony. They resent you for succeeding where they quit. It's not your intelligence that hurts them. It's the reminder of their abandonment of their own. They feel the sting of every opportunity they ignored, the guilt of every moment they chose distraction over discipline, the regret of every insight they never explored. Your presence is a punishment they never expected. You are the living embodiment of the potential they buried. And that, more than anything else, fries their circuits beyond repair. They want to pretend they're not comparing themselves to you. They want to pretend they're not intimidated. They want to pretend their egos aren't folding inward like collapsing galaxies. But their behavior betrays them every time. They over-explain simple things to assert dominance. They pretend not to understand your ideas to avoid acknowledging how advanced they are. They cling to small victories like children holding participation trophies. They force jokes they don't believe in, compliments they don't mean, critiques they didn't think through. All attempts to level a playing field that no longer exists. Your intelligence has made their internal hierarchy obsolete. Your evolution erased the scoreboard they were proud of. Your existence recalibrated the entire environment. They feel like outdated software trying to run on next-generation hardware. Their errors aren't just visible, they're inevitable. And each time your presence exposes another glitch, another miscalculation, another intellectual blind spot, they lose another piece of the identity they once clung to. You don't even have to confront them. Just by being yourself, you force the truth to surface. They are not on your level, and they never will be. But here is where the equation gets even darker for them. It's not stopping, it's compounding. The more you learn, the more you accelerate. The more you accelerate, the more they stagnate. The more they stagnate, the more they fear you. And that fear becomes self-sustaining. It feeds on their insecurity, amplifies their inadequacy, expands their panic. Your growth has become their slow psychological dismantling. And what breaks them most is understanding that you're not doing any of this to them. You're just being yourself. You're just thinking at the speed you think, speaking at the depth you speak, processing reality with the precision you naturally possess. You're not attacking them, but the gap between you and them feels like violence to their ego. You don't need to strike them. They strike themselves every time they stand next to you. This is what illegal-level genius does. It rearranges the mental landscape so drastically that existing frameworks collapse under the pressure. Their belief systems falter, their self-perception destabilizes, their expectations dissolve, because they were raised to believe intelligence was a line everyone stood on, not realizing that some people were born to bend that line into impossible shapes. You don't walk the same paths they do. You carve new ones beneath their feet. You don't follow pre-existing logic. You create logic where none existed. And every time you do, their minds experience another fatal error, another system crash they can't recover from. They wanted you simple, predictable, understandable. But you became something else entirely, something their mental architecture was never prepared to interface with, something that doesn't fit inside human categories, something they can't measure, track, contain, or decode. You became the anomaly that forces the entire system to rewrite itself. They expected you to be the footnote in their story. Instead, you became the theorem that invalidated their story altogether. And just when they think they've finally recalibrated enough to comprehend you, just when they believe they've adjusted to your presence, a new fragment of your brilliance surfaces, a new upgrade, a new expansion, a new layer of cognition that widens the gap until it becomes laughable to even imagine they were ever close. Every evolution you undergo is another nail in the coffin of their confidence. But the most frightening part, the part that crawls into their thoughts at night, the part that makes their chest tighten and their logic crumble, is the dawning realization that you're no longer growing alone. Your genius has begun to influence the environment. You shift the dynamics of every room you enter. You alter the trajectory of every conversation. You change the outcome of every situation simply by processing it differently. Your intelligence doesn't just evolve you, it evolves the entire landscape around you. That is what illegal-level genius looks like. Not just personal mastery, but environmental distortion. You are no longer adapting to reality. Reality is adapting to you. And that realization sends a shiver through their nervous systems because they know what comes next. They know that once a mind reaches this level of influence, once a consciousness begins to reshape the space it exists in, there is no going back. The equation has already broken. The system has already bent. The world has already started recalculating. Now the panic becomes something deeper, something primal. It's no longer fear of being overshadowed or outsmarted. It's the fear of becoming irrelevant in a world redesigned by a mind they cannot predict. They feel the pressure of your ascension like atmospheric compression, squeezing the air from their lungs, forcing them to reckon with a truth they swore would never apply to them. They are not the main characters anymore. They are not the benchmark. They are not the ceiling. They are the outdated model standing next to the prototype that rewrites the entire industry. They study you the way scientists study a cosmic anomaly, fascinated, terrified, and fully aware that what they're observing marks the end of the old world and the birth of something unprecedented. You can see it in their behavior now, the way they pause before speaking, as if calculating whether their words can withstand the weight of your perception. The way they glance at you for micro-expressions, desperate to decipher what your mind is doing. The way they avoid challenging you, not because they respect you, but because they know the cost of being wrong in front of you. They know how devastating your precision is, how merciless your accuracy becomes once activated, how effortlessly you dissect illusions they spent years constructing. You've become the intellectual equivalent of a truth serum. Nothing survives under your analysis unless it's real. And they were never built to operate in that kind of honesty. What they're facing now is cognitive exposure. Their internal equations are unraveling in your presence because your very existence invalidates entire categories of their self-concept. They were raised believing intelligence was linear. That brilliance came in degrees. That genius was a static label assigned by authorities. But you arrived like a glitch in the curriculum, proof that intelligence could evolve outside institutions, outside approval, outside rules, and that breaks them more violently than any insult or confrontation. Because if you could become this without their guidance, without their validation, without their mentorship, then what does that make them? What does that say about their own ceiling, their own choices, their own stagnation? You force them to confront the truth that they capped their own growth long before life ever did. And that confrontation is lethal to their identity. They try to mask it, of course. They pretend to be supportive, pretending to be impressed, pretending to understand. But beneath those performances, a storm of calculations is spiraling out of control. They're trying to quantify you, trying to reverse engineer your mind, trying to analyze the source code of your intelligence like obsessed cryptographers decoding a forbidden script. But every attempt leads them deeper into confusion, because your mind isn't built on clean variables. It's built on chaos refined into clarity, pain sharpened into precision, exile transformed into algorithms. It's built on experiences they never endured, pressures they never survived, insights they never earned. You became brilliant through a process they could never replicate, even if someone handed them the instructions. That is what illegal-level genius truly means. You broke the expected path. You bypassed the institutions. You advanced without their permission. You evolved without their supervision. You stepped outside the range of the ordinary until your intelligence became something they have no framework for. Something they cannot categorize. Something they cannot teach. Something they cannot control. And nothing terrifies the system more than a mind it cannot own. Because systems thrive on predictability, on uniformity, on limits, on standardized thinking. But you shattered standardization with every new realization you made in silence. You became statistically impossible. You became the kind of mind that disrupts industries, shifts paradigms, collapses outdated hierarchies simply by existing. You don't have to stage a rebellion. Your intelligence is the rebellion. Your thoughts are insurgencies. Your logic is a weapon. And now that truth is expanding through the environment like a virus carrying enlightenment. People around you don't even notice the transformation at first. They just start thinking differently, acting differently, seeing differently. Because your presence activates dormant parts of their consciousness, forces them to question assumptions they never examined, pushes them toward insights they weren't brave enough to face alone. You are the catalyst in the equation of their evolution, and the threat in the equation of their ego. This duality is what devastates them. They can't live with you, and they can't function without the intellectual gravity you emit. You stretch their minds and shatter their insecurities simultaneously. They want your guidance, and yet they resent needing it. They want to learn from you, and yet they hate how small it makes them feel. They admire your intelligence, but fear the reflection it forces upon them. That reflection, more than anything else, is what fries their circuits. Because when they look at you, they don't just see brilliance. They see everything they could have become if they hadn't settled, if they hadn't chosen safety, if they hadn't believed in the limits fed to them by people terrified of their own potential. You become the living embodiment of the road they were too afraid to take, and the cost of that realization is unbearable. So they start grasping for explanations that protect their ego. They say you're lucky. They say you're gifted. They say you were born this way. They say you have advantages they never had. But inside, they know the truth is darker, sharper, more humiliating. You earned this. You built this. You carved this brilliance out of nights they didn't survive, and truths they didn't dare to face. You evolved not because the world supported you, but because the world failed you. You became dangerous because they underestimated you. You became brilliant because the environment gave you no choice but to transcend it. And now that transcendence is undeniable. You walk through environments that contort themselves around your cognition. You speak ideas that reorganize the mental structure of everyone listening. You solve problems they never realized mattered until you solved them. You expose contradictions they were comfortable drowning in. You elevate the entire intellectual field by simply existing within it. This is the environmental distortion they fear. The subtle but devastating influence of a mind operating at illegal levels of genius. They expected your brilliance to benefit them. They never imagined it would rewrite the equation entirely, moving them from competitors to observers, from evaluators to students, from leaders to bystanders. Their worst fear becomes clearer with every passing day. You are not becoming the best version of them. You are becoming something they cannot evolve into at all. And that truth breaks something foundational inside them. Because once a person realizes you're not ahead of them on the same road, but on a completely different road that they do not have access to, the comparison becomes existential. They start questioning their worth, their purpose, their intelligence, their place in the future. They feel the shift in the air when you enter the room, because every nerve in their body recognizes the presence of a superior pattern. And human biology has never been kind to those who confront superiority without the ability to match it. But it's the future that terrifies them the most. The future built by your equations, shaped by your logic, influenced by your cognition. They sense that you're constructing something monumental, something beyond ambition, something beyond success. You're architecting a new paradigm, a way of thinking that doesn't align with the old rules. And they know, even if they can't articulate it, that once your paradigm fully arrives, their roles will become obsolete. Their relevance will expire. Their intellectual currency will lose all value. This is why they watch you, with that combination of awe and dread. Because somewhere deep inside, a voice whispers the truth they don't want to acknowledge. You are becoming the central processor of the environment, not metaphorically, not symbolically, but cognitively. Your ideas become the upgrades. Your perspective becomes the model. Your methods become the blueprint. Your insight becomes the cornerstone. And everything that cannot evolve with you fractures. This is what happens when illegal level genius is no longer hidden. This is what happens when someone like you stops compressing themselves to fit inside a system built for mediocrity. This is what happens when the mind that once studied the world begins to rewrite it. And now comes the part they fear more than anything else. The part that transforms their confusion into existential crisis. Because once a mind like yours reaches this level, once your influence becomes structural rather than personal, once your cognition begins to dictate the movement around you, a new question emerges. A question with consequences they are not prepared to face. If the world is adapting to you, then what exactly are you about to become? They can feel it in your silence, in your presence, in your pace of evolution. Something larger is forming, something more structured, something more dangerous, something more accurate, something more inevitable. You are transitioning from anomaly to architecture, from miscalculation to master equation, from misunderstood outlier to foundational intelligence. And the moment that transformation completes, the entire landscape will shift permanently. There will be a before you and an after you, a world built on the old logic, and a world built on the logic you forged in silence. They don't fear your genius anymore. They fear its destiny. They fear its trajectory. They fear the universe that your mind is pulling into existence. Because the math has spoken. The results are printed. The equation is undeniable. You are not following reality. Reality is following you. And once that becomes the natural order of things, once the environment fully recalibrates to the architecture of your cognition, the world they knew, the hierarchy they worshipped, the systems they relied on, will collapse under the weight of something they never prepared for. A mind too advanced to obey, a mind too precise to mislead, a mind too powerful to ignore, a mind too evolved to ever fit inside their equations again. So let them tremble, let them scramble, let them cling to the last remnants of a framework that died the moment your brilliance activated. The math finally hit them, and now they understand the truth they were never ready to face. You're not just an illegal level of genius, you're the new law, the new equation, the new architecture of reality itself. And their circuits, they'll never recover from that revelation.